All right, everyone. Greetings. Good evening from Tbilisi. Good afternoon if you are joining us on the east coast of the US, and good morning to those of you who might be on the west coast. Welcome to the third and final installment of the ARISC Virtual Workshop Series, Research Resources Workshops for the South Caucasus. Today's session will be focusing on research resources for Georgia. I'm Harrison King, your host and moderator for this workshop. I'm a PhD candidate in late modern European history at UC Berkeley, and for the last few years I've been largely based in Tbilisi for dissertation research on the history of the Georgian-Turkish borderlands. ARISC's executive director, Talene Lindsay, and I are delighted to have you join us for our discussion today. This workshop series is part of the many events that we have organized this year celebrating ARISC's 20th anniversary. ARISC is a nonprofit organization in the US, and our mission is to promote and encourage American research in the region and to foster intellectual inquiry across boundaries within the South Caucasus as well as between the South Caucasus and its neighbors. Funding for today's workshop is provided by the US Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs through a grant to the Council of American Overseas Research Centers. Several ARISC members have been working together to develop this series, and our goal is for the librarians and researchers that we have on this panel to share information on library collections, resources, and archival sources that are pertinent to scholars working on Georgia specifically. So our session today will cover central and regional archives in Georgia, libraries and other repositories, research institutes, digital collections, and other resources, as well as some research strategies and some of the ongoing challenges for researchers who are based in Georgia. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end of our program, so please stick around for that portion of our event today. Judging by our audience here, it's nice to see lots of familiar faces. We have a lot of collective experience and expertise on Georgia in this room, so we look forward to hearing your questions, insights, and perspectives during the Q&A. Please also note that we have closed captioning turned on, and since these are automatically generated, there might be some flaws. So as you've no doubt seen in the advertisement for today's event, we have an all-star lineup for you today. We are joined by 4 outstanding scholars in Georgia files. We have with us Kit Condill, the Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies Librarian at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Dr. Timothy Blauvelt, Research Professor of Russia and Eurasia Studies at the U.S. Army War College. Molly Walker, a PhD candidate at Harvard University. And Dr. Görkem Aydemir-Kundakci, an FWO Postdoctoral Fellow in Anthropology at KU Leuven. So we will proceed in that order, and I will introduce each of our speakers in more detail before each of their presentations. Each panelist will speak for approximately 15 minutes, and then we'll open up the floor for general discussion for the last half hour of our webinar. So without further ado, first up is Kit Condill. So as I mentioned, he is the Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies Librarian at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. He is a 2004 graduate of Illinois School of Information Sciences, where he teaches a Slavic bibliography course each spring. And he is a 1995 graduate of Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota. He spent 7 years working for and eventually managing the federally funded Slavic Reference Service, and he was named an inaugural Ralph T. Fisher Library Scholar in 2017. His research interests revolve around the print and online publications of the peoples of Central Eurasia, especially the North Caucasus. And as some of you might recall, Kit was a participant in a previous iteration of this workshop during the COVID-19 era, so I'm sure the resources and tips that he will share today will be equally valuable. So, without further ado, Kit, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. And thank you for that kind introduction, Harrison. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. Is everyone seeing that? Okay. And then let's see. All right. So it's a kind of a tall order to cover all the things that you can do in terms of Georgian studies from the comfort of your own laptop, desk, library in North America or Western Europe. I kept thinking of things as I was putting this presentation together. But of course, I only have about 15 minutes and I've got 19 slides. And so I've got to do less than 1 minute per slide. So it's there's hopefully some useful things in here, some things that maybe people don't think of immediately, the things that don't immediately come to mind. But it's it's an overview. There are also other strategies and resources out there that you can use to accomplish a lot before you ever arrive in Georgia to do your research or continue your research. So let's dive in, and hello to everyone. I see some familiar faces out there. So hello, Jeff. Hello, Alexandra, and everyone. All right, let's try to get to the next slide here. Okay. All right. So this is kind of a warm up, and we'll build up to the big stuff as we go along here. This is a resource that people don't usually think of as a resource for the study of Georgia. But there is a lot of non-English material in HathiTrust. If you're not familiar with it, HathiTrust is one of the biggest digital libraries in the world. Um, Massive amounts of scanned, digitized material from major research libraries in North America and Western Europe and around the world. So what we're looking at here is a search for the keyword vino, the Georgian word for wine, in HathiTrust. So we're searching the full text of millions and millions and millions of digitized pages in HathiTrust. We're getting 157 results. Not great, and not all of them are going to be relevant. But if, for example, a researcher is interested in, the history of wine production in Georgia or the cultural place of wine and the place of wine in Georgian identity, both within Georgia and for non-Georgians, identifying it as a big part of Georgian identity, this could be useful. And you can, oh, let's see now. I've got, uh, I'm sorry, I've got animations here that are not going to work the way that I have this set up, but I've got another. Let me, okay, how's that?
Looks good.
Okay, all right, sorry. Okay, so one of the results in that full text search for the Georgian word for wine is the herald of the bulletin of this Institute of Experimental Agriculture, 7 entire volumes of that, and 810 pages. This is from 1929, I believe. It's a multilingual publication, Russian, Georgian, perhaps other languages. So we're looking at an issue here from 1929. There's part of the table of contents. You've got 99 plus pages of Georgian content here and some amount of Russian and German and French material here. Um, so then you can search within the title that you have pulled up in HathiTrust and see where your search term appears. And then you can grab uh, kind of this text on the left here. And if, like me, you need to Google Translate it at this point, you can do that. And this is what we're getting. So this is 1929 in the bulletin of this experimental agricultural station, people talking about, um, you know, nuts and bolts of wine production. So, this is, not a great source for Georgian studies, but it is a way to do a full text search of Georgian language text, a multilingual text actually, and pretty easily end up with some resources that you might not ever discover any other way. So I wanted to point that out as a possibility. And then speaking of non-Georgian language sources, of course, there are many non-Georgian language sources for the study of Georgia, including Russian language sources, for example, especially in the Soviet period and the pre-Soviet period. We're looking at some 19th century Russian language journal titles here that we happen to have pretty good runs of here at Illinois, but other libraries in Western Europe and North America also have these. Some of these have been digitized, and some of these are available for free. One product that is, I think, very useful for certain types of Georgian studies Research is this Kafka's digital archive, which is available through Eastview. So several major libraries have access to this full text database of the newspaper Kafkaz, published in Tiflis from 1846 to 1918. So you can do a keyword search for any word or part of a word appearing in any article in this newspaper for about 80 years. So it has its drawbacks and quirks, but that is another possibility. Okay. Then as a librarian, as someone who used to work for the Slavic Reference Service, I always want to promote bibliographies, encyclopedias, reference works that have the potential to lead you to hundreds of other sources on your topic, hundreds, thousands of sources that someone else has already gone to the trouble of pulling together for you. So one way to access those or find out whether or not they exist is to use Library of Congress subject headings. These are subject headings that have been assigned by a human being to very useful reference works. We've got some examples here that will lead you to bibliographies of Georgian books, biobibliographies of Georgian authors, etc. They're not necessarily intuitive. Like you're not going to walk up to WorldCat and say, oh, I want to find bibliographies of Georgian books, so I'm going to put Georgian imprints dash bibliography. No one would do that, and yet that is the terminology that is the standard and is used in a lot of cases. The example that we're looking at here on this slide is a little bit of a mind bender. This is a Turkish bibliography of Georgian. I always have to think about this a little bit. Georgian materials about Turkey. So we have Georgian journalists, scholars, political figures writing about Turkey. I mean, that is part of Georgian studies, right? Like people are potentially interested in what did Georgians think about their neighbors across the border in Turkey in various contexts. So that's a massive bibliography of that type of material. So again, something that doesn't necessarily leap to mind, but is important to think about if you really want to think about all the resources that are available. For other such sources or any source having to do with the study of Georgia, please reach out to our Slavic Reference Service. They may send your request across the hall to me since I'm our Georgian expert here, but we can help. Okay, here's another Turkish example. These are just other, obviously there are, I don't mean to say that Turkish sources are better than any other type of sources for the study of Georgia, but they're interesting examples and kind of help to broaden your mind in terms of what's available. This is a Turkish bibliography of Turkish writings about Central Asia and the Caucasus. So it's actually not organized in a very useful way, but there is a name index or a geographical name index at the end, which we're looking at the beginning of it here. So in this massive amount of material, not just Turkish monographs, but also Turkish dissertations and master's theses, and also perhaps most valuably Turkish articles, journal articles, all listed individually in this giant bibliography. Got it here. And so, but you can go to the index, you can go to the geographical index, and the very first entry is Ajara or Ajaria. There are 4 entries numbered here. They give the entry number for Turkish materials about Ajaria. Not a lot, but useful. And if you go to Gürcistan, the Turkish word for Georgia, there are quite a few entries in here for Turks writing about Georgia in Turkish. Okay. So how would you find a resource like this? It has many subject headings assigned to it. The one that would get you there is Caucasus-bibliography. So, and that's what it is, right? It's a bibliography of sources about the Caucasus and Central Asia. So you kind of have to telescope in and out and think about, what types of sources are going to be useful to me. Okay, this is a really good thing that I don't ordinarily share with people. So this is a librarian's trick. So you're welcome. You can do this weird thing in WorldCat, which is the world's largest union catalog of library catalogs. So there are 10,000 libraries, most of them in Western Europe and North America, who have contributed their entire library catalogs to WorldCat, and you can search all of them at the same time. And if you just put in this string right here, right in the search box, just LN:GEO, it will pull up every single thing that has the language code Georgian assigned to it. So we are looking at a list of 56,000 Georgian language items scattered among major libraries in North America and Western Europe right here. Um, and you can limit in the sidebar to by year of publication, subject, etc. Or better, add a keyword that relates to your topic somehow. People, places, and things are always useful. Someone's name or part of someone's name. This is a great way to look at the entirety of what is held in Euro-Atlantic libraries in the Georgian language. Okay. And I know I'm running out of time, so I'll try to be quick here. Transliteration from Georgian to Latin script is always a problem. There are standard systems of how it's supposed to be done, but it's not always done that way. So just something to keep in mind. I am gonna try to quickly, oops. Well, maybe I'll do this after I'm done. Put these links in the chat. These are really great overviews of Georgian national bibliography, which is an attempt to record every single thing that was ever published in Georgia. Very useful, and also can be very difficult to navigate sometimes. You can take a stab at using that on the National Library of Georgia's website. It's a little different than it used to be. They used to have this separate thing, which I think has gone away now, for the Georgian National Bibliography and all these little pieces of the Georgian National Bibliography, which was pretty great. But I believe they've rolled that into their main catalog now, which is both good and bad. Here's examples of the type of thing that you can find. This is a Georgian journal published in Baku in 1913 in Georgian. You're pulling up entries for individual articles in that journal from 1913 in the Georgian National Bibliography. It's pretty amazing to be able to do that from the comfort of your own home. All right. Another great resource that the Georgian National Library provides is their Iberieli Digital Library. Just a massive amount of material in here, including digitized version of the very first Georgian newspaper, which I think is what we're looking at right here. There are over 160,000 individual newspaper issues in here, I believe is what that number means. Over 39,000 journal issues, over 21,000 digitized books, date ranges, over 2,000 Georgian language dissertations and dissertation abstracts. We're looking at a Google translation of a few of those here. These are ones relating to history of Georgia. So you can actually click through and read these dissertations for free. Okay. Also, there are other major collections of Georgian material, including at the Russian National Library in St. Petersburg. You can go to their website and look at a digitized copy of their Georgian language card catalog, which includes everything they had in the Georgian language published before 1998. You can just click through their entire card catalog like you're standing there in St. Petersburg. You can also do that with their card catalog of Georgian journals that they have there, and their card catalog of Georgian newspapers that they have there. Obviously, accessing these materials is not going to be easy for Americans and other people of other nationalities at the moment, but you still like, especially the books catalog, like you can learn about the existence of books that maybe you never would have found otherwise, and then try to locate those in a more accessible situation. There also, I don't want to completely ignore Abkhazia, South Ossetia, other uh, potentially aspects of study of Georgia. So back in the 1990s, this vendor named Norman Ross went to St. Petersburg and made a microfiche copy of the Russian National Library's Abkhaz card catalog, which is hundreds and hundreds of Abkhaz language monographs, and that is on microfiche. And we have a copy of that, and a lot of other major libraries have a copy of that. Same thing for Ossetian. So again, this is not the type of thing that you think is possible or you think that exists, but it definitely does. Okay, and then there are great web resources all over the place for the study of Georgia, of course, also Abkhazia, South Ossetia. This is a great one for Abkhazia. There's a massive amount of digitized material, pretty recent, some of it. So I'm not sure what the copyright situation is exactly there, but there's a massive amount of material, mostly in Russian, also in Abkhaz, here on this website. It will maybe give you a warning, that it's not safe to visit that website, but in my experience, it is safe. So it's always an adventure. All right, so I'm gonna stop there in the interest of time. And again, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. And please send me an email, send the Slavic Reference Service an email, and we will help you any way we can. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Kit. This is really a great overview. Thanks for drawing attention to all of these resources, including some that are lesser known. And don't sweat the technical issues. It's part of the Zoom experience after all of these years. So moving right along, next up is a man who needs no introduction for many of you gathered here today, but I'm happy to introduce him nonetheless. And this is our man in Tbilisi and now in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, Timothy Blauvelt. So Tim is a research professor of Russia and Eurasian studies at the Army War College. He was based in Eurasia for nearly a quarter century, serving for many years as professor of Soviet and post-Soviet studies at Ilia State University in Tbilisi, and as regional director for the South Caucasus for American Councils for International Education. He has published numerous peer-reviewed articles and book chapters in several co-edited volumes. His monograph, Clientelism and Nationality in an Early Soviet Fiefdom, The Trials of Nestor Lokoba, has been published in translation in Georgian and will soon come out in Russian. Tim, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Harrison. So my task is to give a brief overview of the state resources that are available, archives, libraries, and so forth in Georgia when you actually go there or get there. So this is fairly basic and a kind of an overview. I'll try to do this rather quickly. So the main archive that most people have been working with, especially lately, of course, are the National Archives of Georgia, which are part of the Ministry of Justice. And within that archive, you have the Contemporary History Archive, the Historical Archive, the Audiovisual Archive, and the Regional Archive. So the Contemporary History Archive is sort of the equivalent of GARF in Moscow, the state archive primarily of the Soviet period, 1921 to 1991, although I did notice that for the foreign ministry funds, there are files that go up into the late 1990s. But generally speaking, these are the official government institutions of the Soviet state, of ministries, council of ministers, and so forth. The Historical Archive, which is part of the National Archives, is the older period that goes up to 1921. It does have things in the medieval period, the early modern period, but kind of the bulk of it is the Russian administrative period, the 19th century. And it is for that a major resource. The files of the viceroyalty of the Caucasus, the administration, since during the 19th century, Tiflis was the administrative center for the entire North and South Caucasus. It also has the documents from the First Republic from 1918 to 1921. This also contains the Audiovisual Archive, and also regional archives. There are actually quite a number of them in many different towns and cities across Georgia. Probably the largest of the regional archives are the ones in Batumi and the ones in Kutaisi. There are also the archives of the Interior Ministry, and those are really the Soviet period archives. And the problem with this are that they have been closed since October of 2023, so several years now. We can speak about the reasons for that or the prospects for the future. That's sort of a different topic, but just to be aware that they exist. So under the Interior Ministry, you have the Georgian Communist Party Archive and the Security Archive. The Party Archive is the one that was previously in the the Institute for Marx Engels Lenin building, and it was transferred in 2007 to a telephone warehouse in Mukhiani, sort of past Guldani, but preserved, and it's a huge archive. It's about 2 million files. The largest fund of this is number 14, which is the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Georgia. So a major resource, but again, unfortunately, currently inaccessible. The same is true of the Security Archive, the KGB archive under the Interior Ministry. And this is an archive that's much of it was burned during the Tbilisi War in 1991, 1992, when the KGB headquarters was set on fire. Officially, what they would say is 80% of that archive was destroyed, and primarily the informant files. It's been kind of an easy way to deal with the question of lustration, because anybody asking for files on informants will be told that they were burned in the fire. The reality, of course, is that the KGB had branch archives all over the country, so the fire in Tbilisi doesn't entirely explain those, but it's been a convenient sort of shorthand. What they do have, among other things, they have probably about 30,000 criminal case files. Probably the largest of those are from the period of the Stalinist terror of the late 1930s. They also have protocols of the victims of the terror, the decisions of the troikas that were taken, and all of those were digitized. They created a database of those. So in theory, any citizen of Georgia could write to them and ask for the protocol page of a relative or somebody who either was executed or disappeared during the Great Terror. But again, off limits and closed for the time being. The question about languages, and probably my colleagues will go into this in greater detail of actually using them. Communicating with the archivists. Generally speaking, Georgian obviously preferred. Russian tends to be a close second. There's kind of this army of nice middle-aged ladies who run archives and libraries, and for them, Russian is almost a native language. English, in my time working in archives, was virtually non-existent. I've been told that there are younger archivists who are a bit more capable of it, but in my time, it really wasn't something that would get you very far. The fund lists, generally speaking, are often in Georgian. That is the lists of what funds exist, but the inventories within those funds, the opisi, often are in Russian. It depends on what the topic is. Generally speaking, things that were about central administration or in duplicate things that would be sent also to Moscow tend to be in Russian. The more local the topic and more local the fund, like a regional committee of the party or a government institution in a town or something like that would more likely be in Georgian. There are documents in quite a lot of languages. There's a lot of stuff in Russian, in Georgian, in Armenian, Azerbaijani, Persian, and Arabic. Some issues, I think we can talk about these in more detail. Obviously, the precarity of access, the fact that these are subordinated to the state, that there is no independent agency to which that oversees archives, that they belong to ministries and therefore are at the whim of politics. And that seems to be what has been behind some of the closures recently. Also issues of access to foreign researchers at the National Archives, which are open, but there have been issues of access, and I'm sure my colleagues would have opportunity to speak about that later today. Another issue that is perennial is the question of photography and scanning, and that's also something that in all of these archives has been restricted. You have to pay for it. It is quite expensive. You're not allowed to bring in your own camera and just photograph at will for free. And that's been an issue for a number of years. Generally speaking, it tends to be about $1 US, so 3 lari per page, which adds up when you have files and funds that are hundreds and thousands of pages long. Uh, Very briefly about some of the other state resources that are available in Georgia. So we do have the National Parliamentary Library of Georgia, which is a really important resource. It was a repository library during the Tsarist period and the Soviet time, and it has huge amounts of stuff, periodicals, newspapers. There are a lot of rarity items in different collections that they have. They have a very detailed catalog online if you go to their website. And much that has been already digitized on their Everelli page. The State Museum of Literature, which even though it is called a museum, it's really an archive of writers, and there are about 130,000 files of manuscripts. There's about 30,000 photographs, and there's several thousand paintings and things like that, mostly related to authors, mostly Georgian ones, but there's stuff on Pasternak and other authors who spent time in Georgia. The National Center of Manuscripts, not something that might come to mind immediately when thinking about archives, but they actually do have quite large archival collections in a number of languages. In Russian, also in Armenian and Arabic, they have even a few documents in Coptic. What I would say about a lot of these resources, the library, the Center for Manuscripts, many foreign researchers have found themselves exploring these exactly because they have been blocked access either to the party archive or have difficulties of getting access to the national archives and begun to explore in more detail these places. Would also add that the National Library is particularly useful because it is open until 8 p.m. On weekdays, and it's open on weekends. So it's if you have limited amount of time to do research, it's a good way to make better use of your time. So that's all I have to say. I'm sure we can delve into greater detail if I can be of any help. My email is here. I'm returning to Georgia tonight, and I'll be there for the next month or so. And so my door is always open, as they say, and I'll stop there.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tim. This is a great overview of the archival and library landscape, and thanks also for drawing attention to some of the ongoing obstacles, which we can talk about in more depth during the Q&A. Next up is my friend and fellow historian, Molly Walker, who is a PhD candidate at Harvard's Department of the History of Science. She recently defended her dissertation entitled To Defeat a Cruel God, Reclaiming the Land from Malaria, Russia, and Other Threats in the West Caucasus, 1864 to 1939. Molly's research and writing has been funded by grants from the American Councils for International Education's Title VIII program, the Fulbright-Hays program, and multiple centers at Harvard University. Molly will remain teaching at Harvard through the fall while she sets out on her first book project. Molly, the floor is all yours.
Can you see my screen okay and hear me okay? Perfect. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. Big thanks also to Tally and Lindsay and Harrison King for inviting me to speak and for organizing this virtual session on research and resources in Georgia. I'm going to be speaking, so my colleagues have already spoken about what the various archives contain. I'm going to be speaking with a bit more of like a firsthand account, speak about my experience as a PhD candidate doing archival research abroad. But before I begin, I want to say that although I entered my PhD program with some archival experience, I had limited experience researching in a foreign language and zero background working in the archives of a country that had once been a part of the Soviet Union. So everything, or almost everything that I learned about Georgia's archives and libraries, I learned from the help of my colleagues or through trial and error over the course of about 2 years spent doing archival work. And what's more, although I've been studying Georgian or the Georgian language over the past several years, I didn't come in knowing any Georgian prior to my first trip to the archives. So while I do think it's important to study, Georgian, and while some knowledge of Georgian is extremely helpful in navigating the archives, depending on your project, you may be able to get by with just English and Russian. And today I'm going to do my best to offer advice that's useful to researchers with different linguistic skill sets and comfort levels. It's my hope that this presentation will contain useful reminders for experienced researchers, but especially that it will serve as a jumping off point for anyone new to doing archival research in Georgia. I imagine that many of the people on this call today have either recently arrived or plan to go to Georgia soon and undertake some new archival research. Please feel free to ask questions at the end. Working in the archives can be intimidating, but talking about them doesn't have to be. I'll be doing a quick overview of tips for working at the National Archives, the some of Georgia's regional and local archives, and then I'll discuss how to find and request some materials at Georgia's National Parliamentary Library, and then also Harvard's library system. Before you go to the National Archives, it's definitely worth taking some time to look through the catalogs of the different branches of the National Archives to see if there's anything of interest to you and to map out where you want to spend most of your time, especially if you're only planning to be there for a few weeks over the summer. You really want to maximize your time spent in the archives on the day of. I know that some people have an extension on their web browsers, especially like Google Chrome, that automatically translates web pages into English or other languages. So to make this presentation as accessible as possible, I'm including screenshots from sites in both Georgian on the left and English on the right. This is the homepage of the National Archives. You can access the electronic catalogs by clicking on the button on the bottom left, shown here highlighted in red. So after you click on the electronic catalogs button, you'll be able to see this screen. Most of the catalogs that you'll want to look at before you arrive in the archives can be found by clicking on the link at the top left. It says catalogs, funds, and series. And if I were just starting out looking at the National Archives website, this is where I would definitely start. One important thing to note, and this is something I did not realize until like a year into doing research, well, 99% of this website is compatible with the English language translation extensions. This one feature is not. So to access the electronic catalog, you have to turn off the English language extension, or you have to switch, like manually switch the web page to the Georgian language. If you're looking at this page in English and you click on this funds, the catalog of the funds and series, then that button won't work for you, and you'll only be able to access the catalog for the historical archive. You'll only see the documents before 1921. You won't be able to see anything from the recent history archive. And this is just a quick reminder that to toggle between languages, you can use the button at the top right of the screen to switch between English and Georgian. You'll see either EN or GE. And then after you click on the electronic catalogs button, you'll want to click on the orange Shestla or enter button, and you'll be taken to a screen that looks like this. It has a really detailed collection or catalog of all of the collections housed in the different archives. And I would recommend there are kind of 3 ways to use these electronic catalogs before your first trip. First, you can browse the catalog by archive. So that's the kind of, if you look at the left panel here, the third option, you would click on it. You can see a list of all of the different archives. I'd recommend just going through, setting aside a few hours to browse through all of the collections to see what might potentially be of interest to you and to your work. Second, you could search the catalog by keyword. My research is on the history of malaria in Georgia and Abkhazia. So if, for example, I just put in the keyword malaria in this top box, and that was able to yield a result because I was lucky. There was a fund on the by the Trans-Caucasian Committee for Combating Malaria. Had malaria not been a keyword that was pulled out, that keyword search would not have yielded any results. So you'll want to try lots of different keywords, experiment. I think the more useful function is the browse function, and also speaking to archivists to see what they would recommend. For example, there's a lot of material, not just in this one fund, but in the records of the Narkomstrav or the Public Health Commissariat. So you can't just search for a keyword and assume that if it doesn't appear in your search, there's nothing else for you. And then the third and probably the least helpful way to use this electronic catalog is to search by the fund number. To me, or in my experience, this was only really helpful if an archivist told me to look at a specific fund number. And it's important to note that if someone tells you, for example, to look at fund 21, you need to also specify which archive you want to look at. Otherwise, you might get fund 21 at the Kutaisi Regional Archive. So far, I've just shown the catalogs of the historical archives and the regional and local archives, but there are many other catalogs and archives available, and this website has so much information on it. For example, you can search the film catalog and get very detailed information by clicking this button at the top right of the screen. It can tell, for example, I just did a keyword search again of malaria and found a film that was produced in 1932. And although the film is not digitized or available online, you can access a lot of information about the film, see the director, see when it was released, see how long it is and what formats it's contained in. So far, I've just focused on how to find and navigate the electronic catalogs of the physical archives that you need to visit in person. But many archival collections have been digitized, and it's really, really worth spending some time looking around this page. I found that the virtual archive of Abkhazia and of the First Republic of Georgia have been incredibly useful in my own research. These are searchable primarily in Georgian, and you would just want to make sure if Georgian is not your first language, or if you're not sure, definitely try to make sure you're searching multiple spellings and multiple formats of the words that you might be interested in, because sometimes one transliteration might not work, but another would work. After you look around the archives, make note of which archives you want to visit and which ones you want to request while you're there. You will need to request permission in order to visit. And you can do this by navigating back to the home page and clicking on the reading room button at the top left of the home page. And then you're going to select the form that you want to fill in, to download and fill in. On the main page, on the form request page, there's an option to do download a Georgian, an English, or a Russian language request form. I've included a screenshot of the form that I filled in English back in 2022. They'll ask for information like your address, your phone number, your email. If you don't have a physical address in Georgia yet, it's okay. I've put like an Airbnb address. I've also put my American phone number instead of a Georgian phone number. You just need to make sure that you put something that's accurate and where they can reach you. I would recommend applying for as many archives as you think might be of interest to you. When I filled out this form, I requested access to the Poti, Kutaisi, Central Historical Archive, the Recent Historical Archive, and the Audiovisual Archives. I didn't end up seeing all of those on that one visit, but asking for permission to visit them is definitely better. It's definitely better to ask for permission to see too many things than not enough, although you do want to make sure you give kind of an accurate and useful description of your work. I said that I was interested in studying infectious diseases, and I tried to make that as broad as possible. So I listed a number of infectious diseases that I might be interested in, so that the archivists would not tell me that I could not access something because I hadn't filled out the form properly, or said I was interested in like biographies of doctors. So I tried to include as much as I could. Just a few notes about the day of your visit to the National Archives. You're allowed to bring in your laptop, your phone, notebooks, pens, pencils with you. I've never seen anyone get in trouble for bringing food or water, but it's best to keep them in your bag while you're in the reading room. You'll enter on the ground floor of the National Archives in Tbilisi, approach the desk that's on your right. On your very first visit, someone's going to ask to see your passport and then confirm that your visit has been approved. And then they'll send you, if you've requested permission to visit, for example, the historical archives and the recent history archives, you'll go up to the second floor. On the second floor of the archives, there are two different desks, and that's one desk is one archive and the other desk is another archive. At the recent history archive, many of the archivists are a bit younger and they do speak English, Russian, Georgian. And then at the historical archive, I think the archivists generally prefer Georgian, or in some cases Russian. And then other tips. Once you are in the archive, you'll request the finding guides for the fonds that you've decided that you're interested in. You'll be given the finding guide and then the form that you can see here on the left. You have to fill in the form by hand, requesting which fond, which series, and which dila you are interested in seeing for the following day. They ask for all of these numbers, and then they ask you to write in the first few words of the name of the dila in order to make sure that they're just pulling the right document for you. And then if you decide that you want to request scans of any of those documents, you'll be given the form on the right. You'll have to request the form and then be given the form on the right and fill it out. A few notes and kind of tips for navigating all of this. You must submit the request to visit the archives more than 10 days prior to your visit. If you don't hear back, make sure you follow up over email or in person. I think it's best to submit an application to visit the archive like as early as possible, even like 30 days or more in advance of your visit, but they require a minimum of 10 days. So keep that in mind while you're planning your schedule. As Tim mentioned, you're not allowed to take photos of documents. Scans cost three lari each, but students get a half-off discount as long as you can prove your student status. And this has become really useful for me. This includes master's and PhD students. The requested funds or the documents that you request will become available around 10 a.m. the following day. You can have a maximum of 10 documents on your shelf at a time, but you can have, when you're visiting, for example, both the Recent History Archive and the Historical Archive, they put shelves. You can request 10 from each of those, so you can have 20 at a time. The archivists have been incredibly welcoming and generous with their time with me. And definitely I recommend asking them what they would recommend if you've identified the correct funds, if there's anything else that they might recommend. One time I requested access to the audiovisual archive, but didn't actually visit in the first few weeks that I was there. And the archivist had seen my application and actually reached out, and she said, "Oh, I noticed your application and I just put in a few keyword searches and saw that there were some films that might be of interest to you. Do you want to come in and visit and I'll show them to you?" And so they've been very proactive and helpful. And I definitely recommend taking advantage of their expertise. And then the last point I'll say on this is the reading room can get very full, particularly in the afternoon and particularly in the summer. You're welcome to leave your materials out on your table. It's pretty safe there if you take a lunch break, but just be considerate. If you're planning on taking a 3-hour lunch break, maybe don't do that. I have also been fortunate to be able to visit the Kutaisi Regional Archive and the Poti Local Archives. Kutaisi is a major archive. It's very large. It works essentially the same way that the Tbilisi one does, with the same exact forms. The one thing that I thought was a little bit different in Kutaisi than in Tbilisi was that when I was requesting materials from the 1920s, the archivist told me that a number of the materials no longer existed. They were burned or damaged. And so I didn't have access to the ones that I thought I might for the 1920s. Poti is a very, very small archive. It's basically like it's one floor and maybe 3 rooms in a kitchen. It's a little bit harder to find on the map, but there's a blue plaque on the outside of the building. It's a red building. My kind of tips for visiting regional or local archives is to email or call the head archivist before your visit, confirm your dates in advance, tell them what you're interested in seeing. The local archives, this was my experience in Poti, didn't have a scanning service. So I had to scan my own documents and then pay for the documents still. So budget your time accordingly, because that when I was there for only 2 weeks, that ate up a lot of the time. At the very small archives, you might be invited to use the staff kitchens. And in these smaller archives, knowledge of the Georgian language becomes much, much more useful, or much more necessary even. English was almost like I didn't hear any English in the archives in Poti, and it was not. I think then I used a combination of Russian and Georgian. I'm going to quickly talk. How much time do I have? Am I good?
Well, you can take a few more minutes, Molly.
Okay, just on the National Parliamentary Library, I'd recommend similarly searching before you get there to see what might be of interest for you to browse. The National Parliamentary Library has several buildings. The one highlighted in red contains a number of books and archives. You would go around to this on your very first day. You would need to go around to the side of the building to the location where the star is located, the purple star, to get your photo taken and request permission to enter the archives. This is something where the National Archives, it takes about 10 days to process. The National Parliamentary Library, I was able to get in the very next day. So you don't need as much of a lead time on that. The building in green houses newspapers and other important documents that are going to be useful. And then there's other locations in the city too. I think there's one located in Sabertalo. So when you are finding and requesting documents, you can search in Georgian, Russian, or English. Depending on the location that's given in your search when you're searching on their website. It might say archives, Kutaisi depository, book depository. Each of these has a specific location that will tell you not just the building that you need to be in, but the floor and even the desk that you need to go to, because for archival materials, you'll need to submit the form on the right to one desk, and for example, periodicals, you'll need to go to a different desk. And while looking at these photos of these request slips that I filled out, I realized that I filled them out incorrectly. You need to duplicate. So on the left, you have to fill out the request, and then you have to duplicate it on the right side of the form as well. And if you don't do that, they will send it back and request that you fill it out properly. My tips for this: befriending the librarians and making use of their expertise is the biggest help. Especially, there are some librarians located in the back of the main reading room who are so patient and kind and took the time to help me fill out the slips when I first arrived, because I didn't understand the system. At the National Parliamentary Library, you can make multiple requests and return a few days later. So something that was great for me was I might go to, like on the first day of the National Archives, I'd put in requests and wouldn't have access to the documents until the following day. So I split my day between the National Archives and then went over to the National Parliamentary Library and worked there in the afternoons. And at the library, you don't have to pay for scans. Photographs are allowed, so you can take as many as you want. And then I just want to give a shout out to Harvard's Resources on Georgia. Harvard has a really vast collection. It includes minutes, correspondence reports, and other materials of political parties, regional Soviets, other government bodies, peace delegations, and special committees before and during the Russian revolutions of 1917, the Declaration of Independence of the Democratic Republic, as well as government documents, parliamentary debates, ministerial reports. Other documents from 1918 to 1921 are all included in the archival records. And among the new acquisitions currently on display at Harvard's library is the first complete Bible printed in the Georgian language. It's one of the few surviving copies of about 300 produced in Moscow in 1743. So it's definitely worth taking a look at. Harvard has a wonderful finding guide. If you just search Harvard University Georgian Studies Finding Guide, you'll be able to see the best ways to use the library, how to do the keyword searches, what kinds of documents you can find there. And I'll stop there.
Excellent, Molly. Thank you very much. This is very, very helpful tips for navigating these different archives, the application processes, and searching for documents. Very impressive work, and congrats again on defending your dissertation. Okay, moving on to our last speaker, but most certainly not least. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Görkem Aydemir-Kundakci, who is an FWO postdoctoral fellow at KU Leuven. Her research examines long-term displacement, conflict, environmental change, and precarity in Georgia's de facto borderland with Abkhazia. She holds a PhD in anthropology from George Washington University and held postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Calgary. Her writing has appeared in journals such as the Journal of Refugee Studies, History and Anthropology, and Anthropology News. Görkem, I yield the floor to you.
Thank you, Harrison. I will first share my screen and then move from there. Just this, I think. You see it, right? Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here. And also, I want to thank you to the previous speakers. And your presentations were really valuable resources they offered, and especially in terms of archival resources and research materials. What I will be doing today is a bit different as an anthropologist. I will move away from archives and sources for a bit and focus more on the practical side of doing research and what it actually looks like to do ethnographic fieldwork in Georgia, how you enter the field, how you build relationships, and what kind of challenges you might encounter on the ground. So why I am doing this today is, as you know, Georgia has often been seen as an accessible field site, visa-free, very hospitable, relatively easy to navigate. But in the current context, unfortunately, access is becoming less predictable, and researchers should be prepared for additional scrutiny and complications at entry, even refusals at the border, unfortunately. So while it is a very rich and rewarding place still, but with its own, good souls and people, it's a very, interesting place and welcoming place actually to do field work. It is not as straightforward as it might first appear, especially to the early career researchers or students who are planning to do field work in Georgia. And that is really why I wanted to, talk about this today in this workshop, because doing good ethnographic research here depends much less on formal methods and much more on relationships, timings, and context. Right? It is really important to build trust with people, and it is getting more and more complicated given the current political situation in the country. So it has a lot of, in that sense, practical and methodological challenges. Throughout my presentation today, I will be also using my own experiences in doing ethnographic research almost over a decade. My doctoral dissertation, doctoral fieldwork took place in 2016 and 18 intensively, but I first entered the field in 2014 as part of a preliminary research during summers. And I'm still continuing doing fieldwork, but more intensively, I did my fieldwork in much earlier in 2016 and 18. And so one of the first things that you realize when you enter a field, and also specifically in Georgia, is that you may have a research question, right? By the time you enter, probably you write proposals, and you have a kind of sharp, well-built research question, but not much else, right? It is a very actually stressful period. You don't know where to go, who to talk to, how to begin. Probably your language skills are not very limited or non-existent at the time. So the first step is really about situating yourself, right? Where to start and what to do. So building presence through everyday routines, visiting markets, cafes, parks, or shared transport, it gives you a lot of ground to just become familiar to the people, or to do some small talk or chat with people, right? And in doing that, you are also creating a daily rhythm. You are going to the same places, become a familiar face for people. And at that time, even basic, very little Georgian helps. Greetings, small talk, and also it's the kind of showing effort, right? People really appreciate it. And in that sense, I can say that initial access begins with recognition and trust, and not really interviews, right? And what I would like to highlight is that during those early encounters, it's very common to be, or it's really useful or important to be prepared for personal questions, because people tend to, ask about your family. For example, the biggest or the most personal question I was getting, why I don't have a kid, or it is, they can comment about your home country, and it's really, it can get really intimate in a very short time. And I would also recommend that, especially in those early meetings and encounters, I wouldn't even ask if recording is possible, because it is, especially I think in this time period, it's especially increasingly, people are suspicious. Or I remember, for example, from my last visit in the fall, is that even my key informant was kind of thinking that, people maybe she's being listened through her own phone. So there is a lot of, suspicion and lack of confidence sometimes, and it's increasingly so. So especially in the beginning, it's really important to set some boundaries about recording or asking certain kind of questions. I think it's really important to use your gut instinct there and be careful, And one other form of entering the field is through institutions and networks. So it is, especially, I remember when I first entered the field, all I knew was that, okay, I will work on displacement, but I had no idea, about where it is going to be and with whom I will work with, and etc. And my initial meetings with NGOs, local and international, universities and research centers helped me a lot, because they are really helpful in making initial contacts, understanding the landscape, and getting oriented and getting as general or benefiting from those people's experiences, right? And so places like Caucasus Research Center, SCRRC, or Ilyas State University, my dear colleagues from the Anthropology department, especially, they are super generous. They are very welcoming people. And I don't know, for example, what my research would look like if I hadn't have them. So they're really helpful. And also Tbilisi State University again, and organizations like the Social Justice Center. So they are really good starting point. So when I first went to Zubdidi, for example, European Union Monitoring Mission, also they are kind of doing another form of field work. So they are also very helpful. And so it is, of course, important not to stay only within these networks, but if you spend, enough time, a little, a few meetings, it really helps to get situated within the field. And when it comes to doing the research in practice, right? When you know your site, what are you going to do, and you are ready to do your interviews and all the methodologies that you have listed in your proposal, and etc. But in the field, most oftenly, it doesn't work like that, right? It is so once you begin your research, a common mistake is to rely too heavily on interviews, or just trying to arrange interviews all the time. And as I did my intensive research in Zubdidi, for example, it was really hard to schedule even an interview. Many people don't even go to cafes, for example, or they invite. It's really hard to make that scheduling process, or sometimes they. So it requires a lot of waiting for meetings, and then cancellations, rescheduling, and etc. So in my experience, most of the meaningful data comes from conversations, informal, repeated, and unstructured conversations, right? And to be able to do that, especially, it really helped me to choose a few key places and sites and return to them regularly, rather than waiting for interviews, for example, right? And in my case, for example, you see in this picture that because I worked with a displaced community from the Gali district of the de facto state of Abkhazia, I visited a lot of collector centers, right, in Zubdidi, in Tbilisi, in Senaki, across the country. And it was the most, enriching place for me, because people are those spaces are most of the life is happening in the halls, and they are very welcoming. And it's really easy to talk to people in those places. Or I was visiting the border, the so-called boundary, or the so-called border and the administrative boundary line with Abkhazia. It's also another thing, choosing your words. For example, that de facto border is actually called a border in that region by the people. But when you use the border in a kind of more, research settings with local scholars or policymakers or politicians, it can become tricky, So place names or the border word, those are really sensitive points. So it's really also important to, choose your words carefully. And when I was visiting those places, especially the collective centers, I highly recommend, having someone with you, someone local, even if you know the language. It really helps in terms of building trust to have someone that they can relate to, especially in small places with the last name, yeah, right? They can find common friends, relatives, and it just opens up a nice space for you to also integrate into the conversation. So, and one tricky thing is, I'm sure many people who are among the participants, I see some names, they are very experienced in doing research in Georgia and living in Georgia. Navigating hospitality is a big part of doing fieldwork and research, because hospitality is not an optional thing, right? It's this core social value. And invitations are important moments of access, right? Joining that feast table, the supra, right? And having fun together or joining the conversations. And I can say that much of your fieldwork may happen around the table. For example, in this picture, it's kind of a regular, a personal space of one of my informants. And this is the first meeting. I just entered, they're opening a sparkling wine, or most of the time cha-cha, and it is also kind of tricky to put a gentle, boundary, because many times I ended up my field visits as like tipsy because of drinking too much with my informants, and it's really hard, not to say no, but also you can just find tactics of drinking less, and it's a very tricky domain. And also bringing small gifts are also part of building that relationship process. It is kind of sweets, fruit, or cakes, wine, or something from your country is very much very much appreciated. And well, finally, I will talk about researching contested spaces, because I kind of mentioned about the sensitivity of places or some terms. And I did my research in Georgia's de facto borderland with Abkhazia, right? And everyday geopolitics can be really, tricky, or the divisions are so tight that you are expected to take a side often. And it's really, I can't say that I know how to handle this, but also it's really important not to give up on your own ideas, but still be respectful and protect your relationships. So it's a very tricky domain in that sense. And as anthropologists would know, participant observation, which means is that you are observing some social processes while also participating activities, is one of the key methodologies of anthropology, right? And when you can't do that, it becomes really hard to do ethnography only through interviews. Right. So in this contested divide, for example, I use some innovative methodologies to capture the spatial experiences of people who are crossing this ABL unofficially. So rather than, because of ethical reasons and not to jeopardize my informants, I didn't cross with them unofficially. But when I thought about how to capture that spatial engagement and how to encourage people to tell and remember more about their spatial experiences, I kind of thought, also by, drawing on some theoretical aspects too, telling a story, walking in a space, and mapping, like drawing a map are kind of concomitant or similar processes. So I asked my informants to draw a map, a sketch of their, most memorable crossing while also telling about it. And I took a video of as you see, this is a capture of one of those recordings to understand those spatial engagements. So it's really, I think, it's really important to be open about your methods and think creatively and just find some, unexpected ways to reach your informants. So I wouldn't rely on a single method, which we rarely do anyway, but it's really important to, diversify your sites, working with different social groups, and also I think it's really one of the expected parts in research grants, for example, developing a contingency plan. I think in Georgia, as people are aware of the situation, they are expecting that. So it is when we are designing our research proposals, we have to think about that contingency plans more and more, because it is becoming trickier. For example, during my last visit to this is, for example, one of the former crossing points in an enclave or village called Kurcha. There is no way I can. This is where Giga of Pozoria, you may remember, was killed. And there is no way I can go to that place anymore. They are just, maybe, with special permits I can, but in the past we would just freely go. But now I can't even go up to the Enguri Bridge, main crossing point between Abkhazia and Georgia. And when you ask, so I used to come, what happened? And they say times are different now. So it is kind of getting more complicated, and it is really important to be innovatively and also, some alternative plans, because we can't say that, okay, then Georgia is difficult, we can't do research anymore there. We have to find ways of doing it, still doing it, creatively and in-depth researches. So this is all from me. I'm looking forward to your questions, and you please feel free to write to me if you have other questions too, especially for people who will just start, maybe who are planning to start research in Georgia. I would be happy to help. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Görkem, for sharing these very useful tips for doing ethnographic research, which I think, of course, might be relevant first and foremost for anthropologists, but I think what you've outlined is relevant for all of us doing research in Georgia. And your point about much of your fieldwork taking place around the table really resonated with me. So thank you so much. Okay, so thank you all very much for your thoughtful and informative presentations. All of them were jam-packed with useful information, inspiring personal research stories, and I'm very confident that your insights and reflections will be extremely helpful for researchers heading to Georgia for the first time or for return trips. So please join me in thanking our four stellar panelists with a round of applause. And we will now shift gears to the Q&A portion of our workshop.